Chapter 10, Death and Dying Physical Aspects. So, in this section, we will discuss what is death, dying trajectories, leading causes of death, advanced directives, and the end of life care. So, what is death? Well, death can occur at any point in the lifespan. The event is most commonly associated with death is old age and is an anticipated part of late adulthood. Elderly people do become more aware and more preoccupied with death than younger people. And before death, older adults would want to spend time with family and friends. However, younger people before death, if they know that death is coming, would devote more time to things that they have not accomplished yet. So, traveling, um, trying new experiences, and things like that. So, biological death. So, historically defined, biological death is when the heart stops beating and, respiration has ceased, leading to a cessation of brain function. So there are advances in medical care today that have technology that is used for um, having the heart continue to beat, respiration, even if the brain is not capable of being repaired. So, brain death can occur due to injury or disease, but there's two problems with this. One is, how is being brain dead defined? And then how can you actually test it with precision? So, brain death results are when there's unresponsiveness, or they don't have consciousness, where they lack the spontaneous movements or breathing, or when they lack reflexes. Now, it's recommended that doctors check for lack of electrical activity in the cerebral cortex using an EEG before they diagnose someone as being brain dead. And then it's also recommended to give 24 hours to see if there are any improvements prior to removing any life support machines as well. So, the Uniform Determination of Death Act, which was passed in 1980, was one of the first comprehensive statements developed defining when death can be declared. So, it stated that an individual who has sustained either one, irreversible cessation of circulatory or respiratory functions, or two, irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brainstem, is dead. A determination of death must be made in ordinance with accepted medical standards. So it has to meet one of those two criteria. Now, brain death causes some issues because the definition above says that the entire brain, including the brainstem, is dead to be declared as death. So there's whole brain death, and that's when the entire brain, including the brainstem, ceases to function. But then there's partial brain death, which is a concept that a person should be considered dead if he or she, if their higher cognitive functions no longer function, but parts of the brain still function and maintain physical life. So this would be where a person is in a vegetative state or where they have minimal consciousness. Now, there is a lack of consistency across countries in how to define death. So you could actually be considered biologically dead in one country, but alive in another country. So, psychological death, these are thoughts and emotional reactions experienced by the dying person and his or her family and friends. Now, most people who know that they are dying react in ways that allow death to function as a developmental event. So, this is where they may start planning for their funeral, saving up life insurance policies, writing a will, or their final plans for the end of their life and the care that they want. Social death is the institutional and cultural events and processes that relate to a deceased person after they have passed away. So this is a bereavement of family and friends, and it could be considered things like a funeral, a memorial service, a viewing, wakes, and are diverse in form and purposes. And depending on religions or financials, they may choose to do some of these and they may choose not to. Sometimes they may just have people come over and they eat and they just discuss about the person who has passed away. So we're going to pause and process what we have covered so far. So go back and review the slides as needed to answer these questions. So dying trajectories. So dying trajectories are paths or patterns that follow in some particular process. Glasser and Strauss see dying as a passage from being alive to dead, and they refer to dying trajectories as representations of the duration and the shape of the dying process. And duration refers to the time the process takes and the shape to its rate of progression. And there are 5 dying trajectories. There's the lingering pattern, and this is where the person is expected to die, but they cling to life for an undetermined amount of time. There's a short reprieve pattern, where a person's death is postponed unexpectedly, but only for a short amount of time. There's an abrupt surprise pattern, where a person is expected to recover, but then they die instead. A suspended sentence pattern, where a person is discharged from medical care and is expected to live for several years. And then there's the re-entry pattern, where a person experiences a decline but is able to remain at home and then come in and out of the hospital as needed. So among the terminally ill, dying may be experienced as a series of 3 phases. An acute phase, which is a crisis accompanied by high personal stress associated with the increasing awareness that death is coming. Chronic living dying phase, where a person adjusts to the idea of approaching death and experiences a variety of feelings like grief, fear, the unknown, and isolation. And then the terminal period, where they may withdraw from others and general disengagement from the world. So, closeness of death. Well, researchers report that there are a number of indicators associated with the closeness of death. So, in people who die within 1 to 3 years of a terminal diagnosis, there was a decline in their cognitive functioning, the degree of introspection, aggression when it comes to their own self-image, their intelligence scores, and their energy. Now, stress and grief can really have a havoc on a person's body, as we've talked about in physical development. So when somebody is given a diagnosis like that, it takes a real toll on their body, and there are great declines. Now, terminal decline is the official term used to describe the accelerated cognitive degeneration as elderly individuals approach death. And there are lower speeds in cognitive processing and higher inconsistency in speed as well. So we're going to pause and process again to review what we have covered so far. So go back and review the slides as needed to answer these questions. So leading causes of death. So statistically, most of us will die of the common and unexpected illnesses that come along with aging. However, unexpected and sudden deaths will also occur. Now, the issue with these is that sudden deaths often overshadow a person's life, and the person is often remembered for how they died and not how they lived their life. And death can occur at any time throughout a person's lifespan. So, death during the prenatal period. So, during prenatal development, miscarriages, abortions, fetal death, or stillbirths can occur. So, miscarriages can happen before a woman knows she's pregnant. It often is due to natural causes or unnatural causes. And to be considered a miscarriage, it often happens before 19 weeks of development. So it's right here in between when the fingers and toes are developed and before hearing happens. So it kind of gives you a span of what the fetus looks like during that time. So abortions also are a cause of death during prenatal period. Now, abortions can be elective or medically terminated. Fetal death and stillbirths, those are kind of used with the same words, is when there is an absence of a heartbeat, and this occurs after 20 weeks. So this is when from here all the way up into 40 weeks would be considered a stillbirth. Now, this is due to maternal causes, fetal causes, and placental pathology. So fetal causes include chromosomal abnormalities, infections, and congenital abnormalities. Maternal causes include maternal age, the Rh disease, preeclampsia, hypertension, and diabetes. And then placental causes include cord accidents, hemorrhages, and placental insufficiency. And the loss of any of these can be very overwhelming to expected parents. So, death during infancy. So, the leading cause of death is congenital abnormalities. And congenital abnormalities are any birth defects or chromosomal abnormalities that are incompatible with life. Some other leading causes of death are short gestation periods, SIDS, maternal complications, and unintentional injury. And the most common for that would be suffocation. So you can kind of see right here in the chart how these have increased or decreased depending on the years. So going through all those there. And this is for the US as well. So death during early childhood. The leading cause of death in early childhood is unintentional injury. And the most common one is a motor vehicle accident. And this could be getting hit by a car, not wearing a seatbelt, not being in the proper car seat. Drowning, fires and burns, suffocation, being a pedestrian and getting struck, falls, poisoning, firearms, and natural and environmental events also are in that category. Below that, it would be congenital abnormalities, cancer, homicide, and heart disease are the leading causes of death in this age range. So during middle and late childhood, the leading cause of death is the same as it is in early, which is unintentional injury. However, there's a new form of transportation that really starts to emerge during this time as children start going to school and riding buses, going on field trips, and things like that. So motor vehicle is still the most common, and then right below that is other transportation accidents, drowning, fires and burns, suffocation, falls, poisoning, firearms, and natural and environmental effects are still there, and then cancer, congenital abnormalities, homicide, and heart disease. So the main difference between early and late is the other transportations, and then also pedestrian accidents. So during adolescence, the leading cause of death also is unintentional injury. However, it is in regard to motor vehicle accidents. Now they're starting to drive, poisoning, drowning, other transportation accidents, and suffocation. But now homicide has moved up, suicide has entered, cancer, and then heart disease. In adulthood, emerging adulthood, ages 18 to 25, unintentional injury is one of the most common, is the number one cause of death. So motor vehicle accidents and poisonings are the two most common, followed by homicide, suicide, cancer, and heart disease. In the later part of early adulthood, ages 26 to 39, unintentional injury is still there with the motor vehicle accident and poisoning, but then cancer is the second leading cause, suicide, heart disease, and homicide is last in this age group. In middle adulthood, cancer is the number one cause of death during this age range, followed by heart disease, unintentional injuries, and poisoning is the leading cause, and then diabetes and cerebral vascular disease. And in late adulthood, again, we see cancer being up at the top, followed by heart disease, chronic respiratory disease, cerebrovascular disease, and then diabetes. So you could really see this shift in the differences. So accidents kind of fall away, and cancer, heart disease, and more illness related becomes the leading cause of death during late adulthood. Beyond 75 years of age, heart disease is the number one cause of death, followed by cancer, cerebrovascular disease, chronic respiratory disease, and then the last one that does come, and it's the first time that it's appeared, is Alzheimer's disease being in the top 5 causes of death. So, in a historical perspective, over the last 100 years, leading causes of death have changed from communicable diseases to chronic degenerative diseases. And the place of death has also shifted from homes to hospitals, to hospices, and to nursing homes. So if we look at the difference between the 1900s and 2010, there's a big shift between infectious diseases going from 579.6 per 100,000 deaths to only 16.2. There's a big difference. But if we look over here at the side, cancer has increased, heart disease has increased as well. So there's some differences, but then Alzheimer's wasn't even over or considered over here in this category, but then it pops up as well. So we're going to pause and process what we have covered so far, go back and review the slides as needed to address these questions. So advance directives. Who will decide if you can't? So advance directives are a written document that explicitly tells what medical measures you would like employed if you lose the capacity to make decisions. So if you were in a coma or couldn't make a decision, who would make the decision if you became incapacitated? So basic nursing care is one of the things that is part of an advance directive. And basic nursing care are care provided to all hospital patients, such as food, feeding tubes, and cleaning of wounds. Medical care is also a part of an advance directive. So these are things like power of attorney, living will, whether you want to be resuscitated or not, if you're an organ donor. And there's documents, you go to a lawyer, you get these written up so that if you didn't want to be in a vegetated state, or you didn't want to be in a coma, or you didn't want to be brain dead, you could tell them what your wishes would be. Now, the Terry Schindler Chavero case is one of the prime reasons why you should have an advance directive. In this case, she suffered major brain damage when her heart stopped for 5 minutes, and she spent years in nursing homes and rehabilitation centers, but she never regained higher brain function. She could function, but she was never the same as before. In 1998, 8 years later, her husband filed a legal petition to have her feeding tube removed, saying that his wife had told him before that she would never want to be artificially kept alive in such a situation. However, she did not have an advance directive telling. So her husband wanted her to have the feeding tube removed, whereas her parents fought this request. And they had videotapes made of them showing that she was up in bed, that she was a person, that she was talking, she was not unresponsive. But the court case actually did have the feeding tube removed, and she did pass away from starvation. And I have a link for you here to watch what happened and why it's so important for you to have a plan, even if you don't because we never know when our time is coming. She didn't expect at 26 that she would need that type of document to have her needs met. So it's never too early to start planning for those types of things so that your needs are met. So go back and review the slides as needed to answer these questions. So end of life care. So there's two main types of end of life care. There's a palliative care and there's hospice care. So palliative care is treatment for those suffering from illness that focuses on pain management, symptom control, and emotional support in the face of stress. Now, this can be provided at any point during an illness. So, for instance, they may have it at the beginning, they may go off of it for a little bit, and then they may have to come back on. Whereas hospice care is in those final months of life. And this can be provided in a person's home or hospice, and it typically happens when there's less than 6 months to live. And during this time, they are trying to make sure that the dying person is as peaceful and comfortable as possible. They provide medication to control pain only when the person wishes for it. And if they're unresponsive, that's where their advance directive comes into play, and they would follow the rules that were in that document. And then they also want the dying person's autonomy carefully respected, and the dignity of the person is at the forefront of the person's mind, or the care people's minds. So again, that advance directive is very important, just in case you're in a situation where you may not be able to articulate your wishes. So physician-assisted suicide is something that is a current topic that has popped up a lot in media and news. And this is when a doctor provides a patient with the means to commit suicide at the patient's request. Now, the biggest difference between physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, is that the doctor provides the lethal dose, but the patient is the one who actually takes the medication that the doctor gives. It is very controversial in the United States at this time, and there's a process in which the patient's request is reviewed and a decision is made. So the patient will request, and then they will assume if it's a responsibility to investigate the request. Does the patient fit the criteria for this type of assistance? They'll explain the limits of it. The patients will explore the reasons for why they want it. They'll present and discuss it, and then they'll include their family, and then the doctor will meet the needs. And again, depending on that advance directive, that's a very important thing as well, to have that in, just in case if that is a decision that you wish to have an option for. So euthanasia, this is physician-assisted suicide does fall under the broad spectrum of euthanasia, and euthanasia is the willful ending of life, but it's not the consequence of a disease, an illness, or an injury. And there is voluntary euthanasia, which is where the physician's assisted suicide comes under, and then there's non-voluntary. So voluntary euthanasia is when a patient requests to die and the doctor administers the dose. The biggest difference between voluntary euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide is the doctor gives the lethal dose to the patient, but the doctor administers it for voluntary euthanasia, but the patient administers it for the physician-assisted suicide. Now, non-voluntary euthanasia, this is where a doctor administers a deadly dose without the patient requesting it. This would be an example of somebody that had the life sentence and was on death row. That would be an example of non-voluntary euthanasia. Now, legalization of euthanasia is controversial, and the progression of this is redefining what death is and how death occurs. So again, we're going to pause and process what we have covered so far. Go back and look at the slides as needed.